Welcome to The Milk Check, a podcast from TJ Jacoby and Company, where we share market insights and analysis with dairy farmers in mind.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this very special recording of the Milk Check podcast. Today, our topic is, what is the future of dairy proteins? And we have two very special guests. The first is Lloyd Metzger, VP of Quality and Technical Services for Valley Queen Cheese Company and formerly Professor of Dairy Science at South Dakota State University. And the second, particularly special to me, is my son, TJ Jacoby, Whey Technologist for Valley Queen, a South Dakota State graduate, and someone who has been interested in dairy proteins since his first biology class in high school. Guys, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the Milk Check.
Glad to be here.
Good to be on, Dad.
It's December 18th, 2025. Milk production in the U.S. is up 4%. Milk production in Europe is up something similar. Milk production in New Zealand is up. Milk production in Argentina is up. We are definitely in an environment today where the supply of milk and dairy is overwhelming demand, at least for the moment. Cheese prices are near historical lows. Butter prices are near historical lows. Non-fat dry milk, skim milk powder prices are on the low end of the range. This market is a market that feels heavy, and I think most people out there would say it almost feels like even though we're at lows, we may actually go lower before we go higher. And yet, on the other hand, there are whey proteins. Josh, if I'm not mistaken, whey proteins just hit historical highs.
Maybe the highest prices we've ever seen for whey protein isolate, WPC 80.
So we have an environment where the demand on the protein side is extremely strong, and the trends on protein consumption are extremely strong and really feel like they're going to be around for quite some time. We've got baby boomers retiring, and whether it's because of GLP-1s or it's just a general knowledge and understanding of what human nutritional needs are as people age, they know that they need more protein in their diet. So it begs the question, what is going on with dairy proteins and whey proteins, and how is this going to evolve in such a unique market where demand is so strong for protein right now? And so I'm going to ask the question first, what's the difference at a molecular level between whey proteins and milk proteins? Because when we're in an environment like we are now, where you've got the demand really, really high, you also have a market that's going to start looking for alternatives simply because prices are so high. What is the difference between milk proteins in general and whey proteins specifically?
It's important to talk about from a functional perspective how the proteins are different. I'm sure we'll get into the nutritional differences between those proteins as well. It's important to understand what's driving those differences in functional characteristics, and it's really all about calcium. The casein system is designed to carry calcium. The whey protein system is not designed to carry calcium. That differentiates the two groups of proteins and makes their properties very different.
I'll explain it like this. Milk proteins, there's two classes of proteins, right? There's casein and then there's whey. The casein is used to make cheese, and then the whey protein is what comes off. So the whey protein is everything that is not used to make cheese. So the reason why casein proteins work so well for cheese is because those proteins like to fall together in these spheres. They like to stick to one another. They like to stick to one another because they have certain groups that latches onto the calcium, and then they bridge with phosphate. And when they do, they have multiple proteins, different types of casein proteins that bridge together with the phosphate. And then based on their repulsion forces, they stick together. Calcium and phosphates really help it stick. When we make cheese, the outside of that casein micelle, that ball, when we make cheese, that outside is stripped off. It becomes hydrophobic, and that causes those spheres to stick together. That's a huge functional property of casein. Whey protein is the opposite. Whey protein is really hydrophilic. It's very polar. So they like to float around in solution and stay floating around in solution. And they don't like casein. It likes to stay separate from casein. And so when you make cheese, it readily is released into the whey stream because it likes to stick with the water. In the same way, those kind of stick together with these sulfur groups. But when you heat it up, they unfold. And when they unfold, now there's certain reactions that can take place. So those are the two major differences between casein and whey. Lloyd, what did I miss?
I would try to simplify it a little bit. The difference between casein and whey protein is casein is what's trapped when we make cheese, and whey protein is the soluble protein that's left over in the water phase of cheese. Cheese making is a dehydration process. We concentrate the fat and protein that's in milk, the casein version of protein in milk. but you got to look at the properties of those two systems and the groups of proteins. So the casein protein is actually really stable to heat, but it is not stable to pH. Casein will always coagulate at low pH. So you lower the pH of milk, you get a yogurt-like product. So that's all the casein that's coming out of the system. Whey proteins don't mind a low pH, and they'll stay soluble at a wide range of pH. But now when you get to temperature, the complete opposite happens. Casein can handle super high temperatures and be very stable. Whey proteins cannot handle high temperature at all. They start to gel. I think it's important to look at the two different groups. Now you get into the functional differences between those two and the very different properties you have between those. And that's why you get all these products that are very different from each other. Like cheese is so much different than whey protein. And then you have these dairy products that are a combination that have the two together. So like when we make yogurt, we end up with the two products together and get this property that's partway in between the two proteins.
Based on what you're describing, when we're talking about milk proteins, NPC 80, for example, there's a higher level of calcium, I take it, in milk proteins than compared to whey proteins. Is that true?
Absolutely. But let's remind everybody, milk protein is both casein and whey protein together at the normal ratio that's in milk. So of the protein, 80% is casein, 20% is whey protein. So when you say milk protein, you're actually meaning 80% casein and 20% whey protein. Now, when we talk about cheese or casein, we're basically 100% casein and 0% whey protein. Now, when we talk about whey protein, we're essentially 100% whey protein, no casein, except for one fragment of casein that actually gets solubilized, as TJ described, and now actually becomes part of whey protein. Something that a lot of people don't understand is that about 15% of what we call whey protein is actually a piece of casein that gets lost in the whey and now gets captured and harvested in the whey protein manufacture process. But again, it's important to remember milk protein is an 80-20 combination of casein and whey protein together. So when you're talking about milk protein, you're actually talking about whey protein and casein together.
It's funny. I just learned something I never really quite had my head around, and that's that 80-20 ratio, that 80% of all the protein in milk is actually either alpha or beta casein, correct?
There's actually 4 different casein fractions that are involved that make up that 80% of the total protein.
Okay. The casein molecule isn't really any bigger than most of the whey protein molecules, but they tend to clump together in those micelles, and so they act as one big, humongous mass compared to whey proteins, correct?
Whey proteins maybe collect in pairs, like 2 at a time, but casein proteins, there's hundreds, right, Lloyd, that will just clump together.
Thousands.
So these spheres are absolutely massive protein complexes. But in fact, there are a lot of little individual proteins that make it up. And they're all bridged together with calcium and phosphate.
It's a packaging system that was designed to package up calcium and phosphorus. So the whole casein system was designed by nature as a delivery vehicle for calcium and phosphorus, because calcium is not soluble by itself. Calcium phosphate is essentially rock. It's the material that makes up eggshells. So think about a ground up eggshell. That calcium phosphate complex is not soluble, and it will sink to the bottom of your container of milk if you didn't have the protein complex to hold it in solution. The analogy I use is it's basically a kidney stone. Think about how much fun milking a cow would be if all the calcium and phosphorus was in the form of a kidney stone. As you're trying to milk the cow, all that calcium and phosphorus can be solubilized with the casein system and put it into solution and then make it so you can deliver that in a nutritional product.
That makes perfect sense. That's really cool. I think you guys also already touched on the differences in solubility as you were describing the different proteins, but there's differences in digestibility as well. What's the source of that difference?
I'll take this one. Returning back to the infant stage, I feel like we could set this up in light of why nature created these proteins. Dairy is the fundamental human food for infants. You have babies that can live up to a year off of just their mother's milk. All the proteins that are found in there, those building blocks to grow an infant, can be boiled down to those 2 protein streams, whey protein and casein protein. The purpose of the casein protein for the infant is it's fast acting. It'll go right into the gut, and the gut is full of enzymes, but also really, really low pH, so low that it actually causes even those whey proteins to unfold. And it allows the stomach enzymes to break it up super, super fast and be absorbed. It's considered one of the most bioavailable proteins known to man. It's designed for that. That's why nature created whey protein. Well, whey protein itself is also very nutritious. It has one of the highest concentrations of essential amino acid and the second highest known demand of branched chain amino acids. That means it doesn't have to be processed through the liver before it can be used by the human body. If your body's actively using and consuming protein, whey protein is really good because it can be absorbed into your system and go right to the muscles. 33% of your muscle is branched chain amino acids. That's what's getting broken down while you're working out. And then in the elderly, that's what's getting broken down that's causing some muscle degeneration. Whey protein can help fortify that very quickly. However, all protein that is consumed in the body could also easily be processed through the liver with time. And so if you have time, that's where the casein comes into play. The casein, when it hits that acidic environment in the gut, it immediately clumps together. It actually creates cheese curds in the gut. And the reason why that's so important is it slows down digestion so that slowly over time, that will be absorbed into the system. So it's not like a rush of energy right after the baby eats and then it goes away right away. Instead, it slows it down. The casein itself also likes to trap other nutrients. The casein in the gut will house the fat and the vitamins and the nutrients so that it's slowly absorbed over the course of the next few hours before the baby's next feeding.
As a result of those digestibility differences, what are the differences in the amino acid profiles between casein and whey proteins? The body's going to need to break down most of that casein in order to absorb it. When the body breaks down that casein, what are the differences in the way that it absorbs some of those amino acid profiles and short chain protein strands from the casein versus what's readily bioavailable from the whey proteins?
Casein does not have the same percentage of those essential amino acids. It's not as high, but it's designed to be slow absorbing. Protein itself, it almost doesn't matter the amino acid structure as long as your body has enough of those vitamins and nutrients to absorb and to restructure it to a different protein within the liver. That's what your body needs. Most of us, the protein doesn't have to be fast acting. It's not like our muscles are actively breaking down all the time. It can slowly be absorbed, be processed through the liver, and then used for almost any other function, as long as we have all the vitamins and minerals that we need.
Part of this huge shift we're seeing in demand for protein, especially whey protein, this started 25, 30 years ago with bodybuilders and wanting to build muscle mass. And the realization that TJ mentioned, branched chain amino acids are very important if you want to rapidly put muscle mass on. It's also very important if you're elderly or if you have sarcopenia where you're starting to lose muscle mass. In those nutritional states, it's really important to have high level of branched chain amino acids so you could put muscle on. Or if you're on a GLP-1 medication where you're not going to be able to eat very much, you need a very efficient source of protein to build muscle mass. So there's certain nutritional states where it is important to have branched chain amino acids and be able to get those from a protein like whey protein that has them at a very high level. But for the normal person, it's not really all that relevant. You could get the protein you need from any protein that provides all the essential amino acids. Now, most plant proteins don't do that. We're talking about the difference between casein and whey protein. Both of them are an order of magnitude higher in nutritional quality than plant proteins because they have all the essential amino acids. And to TJ's point, as long as you have the essential amino acids, the body can produce the non-essential amino acids from those essential. Essential ones are amino acids the body can't produce. You have to have those in the food you're consuming to be able to produce the components you need.
We've got listeners from the dairy side of the equation and listeners from the utilization side that are making different products. And some of those customers are currently faced with the reality that a part of the equation for their adoption of whey proteins as an ingredient is shifting. The competition level is very high. They're having more difficulty accessing some of it, and the price has changed quite a bit. And I think that when you're talking about these products going into CPG applications as a lower inclusion rate ingredient, but with a lot of label power, being able to put whey protein, for instance, on that label, there's several of them out there that are struggling to determine what the functional differences might be between the various dairy proteins. And what I'm afraid that is happening is some of these companies that are on the lower end of the value scale and can't afford to keep up with all of the great products that are demanding whey protein or even milk protein are going to start exploring alternatives outside of our space. And I think that we don't want that, right? And what we're seeing is this popularity of whey protein is driving a lot of customers for R&D projects to be asking us specifically for whey protein. So help us understand what application might make sense to use one, the other, or both?
It completely depends on the product that you're after and the characteristics of the product that you want. Something like a beverage can go two different directions. So if you're going to retort the beverage and put a lot of heat on it, you can't do that with most whey proteins. They're going to gel. The most comparable protein to whey protein would be an egg protein. And everybody understands what happens when you heat eggs. They turn into a gel. So whey proteins will happily do that if you have a high enough concentration and you expose them to enough heat. Casein actually helps to protect the whey protein from that coagulation. A lot of these high protein beverages, they're oftentimes a combination of casein and whey protein. They might alter the ratio a little bit from the 80-20. They might bump the whey protein up a little bit and have a 60-40 casein to whey protein. And so you'll see ranges in that ratio of casein to whey protein depending on the characteristics of the product that you're actually after. The heat is a big piece of that. And then we go to pH as a big piece of what changes the functionality of casein to whey protein and makes you change those ratios. Yogurt is another great example. You've got these super, super high protein yogurts. In a lot of cases, they fortified with quite a bit of whey protein to be able to have more protein and still have the characteristics that you want in that product. In the protein bars, there's all kinds of whey proteins there. In that application, you actually don't even solubilize the protein. There's hardly any water in that bar. It's really almost a dry protein that has a plasticizer with it, some carbohydrates that actually make that edible. You're almost eating a dry product. There's a lot of food chemistry that goes into which product category you're putting it in. There's not this straight, fast rule that you use whey proteins in this, you use casein in that. It depends on what food chemistry you use and how you put the blend together, and then what processing you couple with that to get the characteristic that you're actually after.
Can we spend a minute or two talking about the acidified products? They've gained a lot of popularity. The market potential is quite large. Can you talk a bit about the differences between the clear WPIs and our traditional products?
I'm going to clarify the question. Are you talking specifically about whey protein only in the clear whey protein beverages versus the normal whey protein beverages? Yes. We really start to get into the weeds because we've got different whey products. So we've got whey protein concentrate, and then that comes in various forms. WPC 34 or WPC 80 are the most common. The 80 and the 34 correspond to how much protein on a dry basis those two products have. And they have whey proteins in the normal ratio that would be in the starting whey. Then we get into a group of products called whey protein isolates. And whey protein isolates go through an additional manufacturing process that allows you to purify the protein further, and they'll have more than 90% protein on a dry basis. And you may start to alter the ratio of the various whey proteins that were present in the starting whey. Now, when we get into the clear whey protein isolates, we really start to alter the ratio of the proteins that are in there. We'll also start to change some of the mineral profile of the components that are in that product. And then when we use those isolates in a formulation, we got to be careful about all the other ingredients because they're going to have an impact on whether or not the product is actually clear and whether or not it can be stable to heat. So you can actually make whey protein stable to heat by controlling the mineral profile and controlling some of the processing conditions. You're now taking a category of dairy ingredient and you're starting to use technology, IP, to be able to provide specific functional characteristics that aren't normally part of that ingredient. All of these may be called the same thing, and the basic consumer has absolutely no idea what the differences between all these things are. And when they're looking at a label, they're probably looking for the word whey protein, and that's all they're looking for.
As we've seen the market tighten up, we've seen more inquiries and exploration about the use of Procream, also called WPPC, also called WPC 70. So many different names. Definitely in our experience, there's quite a uniqueness as we originate this product for different manufacturers. Perhaps we could talk a bit more about what this product is and how it differs from the other proteins.
I talked about WPC 80, that's just the normal whey protein that we concentrate out of whey. And then I mentioned whey protein isolate. To convert WPC 80 to a whey protein isolate, you use a filtration step called microfiltration. And in that microfiltration step, you remove any protein that is interacting with fat and take that out of the system. So if you start with a normal WPC 80 and we're going to change it into a WPI, we are going to go through a microfiltration process, and we're going to lose about 25% of the protein that was there and all of the fat that was there. And we're going to make a WPI out of that. And that WPI is going to have about 75% of the protein we started with. The protein that we harvest out of that is actually procream. Procream is just a byproduct of converting WPC80 into WPI. And it's going to have about 25% of the mass of the protein that you started with and all of the fat that was in that starting WPC80 material. So that's why you see it called high fat WPC30. And if you drive that down, it's about a WPC60. You can take that and blend that with WPC34. You can do all kinds of things with that ingredient. Manufacturers are always trying to find a home for that because you've got a very high value product that's easy to market in WPI.
But Lloyd, that procream, our hunch is there's a lot more value in that procream than the market currently has its head around.
They're the same proteins that are in WPI. They're just interacting with the fat. Now, the fat is very unique in that there's quite a bit of phospholipid fat in there. And so there's a lot of literature and research being done on the potential health benefits for brain development of phospholipids for infants as well as elderly to help with memory retention and actually help to prevent some Alzheimer's effects. So you see some companies starting to market that component that they've isolated. I think there is a lot of potential value there, but we're in the early stages of where that's going to go. And you have some companies leading the way that are producing very specialized procream type products that are being used in infant nutrition or elderly nutrition.
But Lloyd, how do those phospholipids affect the shelf life of procream?
They don't help. The phospholipids are unsaturated fats or partially unsaturated, and unsaturated fats are very easy to oxidize. So if they're not handled properly, you'll get very stale and oxidized off flavors in the products. It's something you got to be careful of.
Oxidized fats, another way to call it, that's rancid, right?
Yes, on its way to rancid.
Another selling point that people will make of the benefits of procream are IgGs. Can you guys explain a bit more of what that is? It's in the layman.
So immunoglobulin is a protein that's also present in milk. It's really high in colostrum. It's at very low levels in milk. About 72 hours after the cow has started milking, the levels drop way down. But there is still a low level there. Those immunoglobulins are a very large protein. So when you go through your WPI manufacturing process, they're going to partition with that fat and that protein portion that you're capturing. So they're going to go in that procream. Looking at the composition of IgG in the different waste streams, you'll find it's elevated in that procream portion. Now, I'd be a little concerned about what kind of shape that IgG's in because you've seen a lot of heat and different manufacturing conditions through that process. So you'd really have to be careful about what kind of claims you're making based on what kind of shape that IgG's in.
Mm-hmm. For an infant, those IgGs to go right into the bloodstream, it's whole proteins. But for us, it actually has to break up the protein entirely before it can be absorbed into our system. So what kind of functional benefits does IgG bring for an adult? I'd be curious to see what that literature entails.
Over the last couple of decades, DNA technology has been used more and more to produce valuable proteins, often for medical use like insulin. Are we going to see a point with the cost benefit of that kind of technology will reach where we can actually use that to produce these whey proteins rather than using a cow?
There's different levels of concern depending on the particular protein. An individual protein and an individual soluble protein like beta-lactoglobulin or alpha-lactoalbumin that are in whey, those have more potential to be produced in a fermentation type process because they're an individual protein. You can overexpress it. You can get a lot of that produced. But when you get to the complexities of multiple proteins that are in whey, that's when it really becomes uneconomical to do that from a fermentation standpoint because you've got to produce all of those individually, try to put them together, and then purify them. What people forget is how efficient the cow is. The cow is essentially a walking fermentation tank that feeds itself, controls its own temperature, cleans itself up. All you've got to do is get the milk out of it. When you look at all the steps that go into the process and what it takes to produce it, it's really hard to beat the efficiency of a cow.
Lloyd, am I right in assuming that the threat of cellular agriculture to dairy would come in the development of specific protein chains and amino acids, but probably not in terms of the complete protein profile that is delivered in milk proteins and whey proteins.
Correct. And it would be the very high-end expensive. So the lactoferrin, would be your first one, or some of the IgG, anything that is at low concentration and very high value. Because even if you did everything perfectly, you're probably still talking $25 to $30 a pound in the manufacture and isolation process. Well, we're really excited about $11 whey protein isolate, right? And that's still half the price.
Makes sense. Lloyd, TJ, this was an absolutely fantastic discussion. This was exactly what I wanted to get out of it. I can tell you I learned quite a bit today, and I'm sure our listeners will too. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to do it.
Truly special to be on today, Dan. I grew up listening to a lot of these podcasts, right? Now we're here. Now we're on it together with you. And so, yeah, it's truly special.
We welcome your participation in the Milk Check. If you have comments to share or questions you want answered, send an email to podcast@jacoby.com. Our theme music is composed and performed by Phil Kagi. The Milk Check is a production of TC Jacoby and Company.